Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Wow. Well, we're sort of back on the air. We're going to approximate being back on the air anyway. We'll tape this for later podcast, and I'm hopeful that we've got all our balances and other signals straight. We are operating off of an ancient and pretty unwilling MacBook Air, vintage, 2009, 2010, perhaps. A rickety old thing that stood by me nonetheless. And that we were able to dig up the product licenses from our main MacBook Pro that usually runs the show, and get some of the apps that I use working on it, and whatever. I think we cobbled it together. The sound quality will be different, the production value will be different, but the information will be the same, and that's supposed to be what we're all here for. I'm here for therapy, of course. It's been very rough being off the air for a couple of days. Those of you who were with us on Thursday would have heard us get on the air late because of the initial computer crash. I might as well tell you the story, right? The initial computer crash just before 9 o'clock, and then we went off the air early as well, around 10:40 or so. Doesn't make a difference what time it is for those of you listening to the podcast. We fell short by about 15 minutes or so getting the show completed in total, I think. Anyway, the computer crashed, and it was a hell of a day. Couldn't get the computer back up and running in time to finish out the show. Things were moving really slowly. And in addition, my home alarm system was slowly failing one component at a time. It's a little weird, and of course it made it impossible to even go back. I tried to go back and record an additional segment in order to fill out the program for podcast purposes, even if the live show had fallen apart. Couldn't do it because the home alarm is beeping intermittently to let me know about how one element after the other of it is failing, and it took me quite a while to get that taken care of. And in the process of getting that taken care of, I found that the home landline, the phone line, also went down. And I thought that might be as a result of tampering with, under their instruction, tech support's instruction, tampering with the alarm control panel. And that kept the home phone line out until Tuesday, when I finally got that back up and running with the help of the Verizon repair guys. The computer never really recovered. The Apple Store has got it, and they are going to keep it out for repair for the next couple of days. We should see that back perhaps next week if all goes well. We're going to put a new main logic board in it and see if we can't get it back up and running. In the meantime, we try to press the old MacBook Air into service, and we'll see what we get. But that wasn't all, by the way, for the surprises on Thursday. Let's see. So there was the computer crashed, the alarm crashed, the phone lines went down. And at that point, by the way, I started to think, I guess at this point everybody asks, are you being hacked? Is Russia after you? I don't think I'm not that important. Why would they come after me? Okay, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's a gun nut. I don't know. I guess in some way it could all be related on, in the cyber world somewhere. A home alarm is monitored remotely, right? The phone line is attached to that. Computers could be, can get hacked all the time. That's what we usually think of when there's hacking going on. But, well, I don't know. It just didn't seem quite right. But the thought did cross my mind. Now then, I went outside at the end of the day after struggling to get the alarm turned off, trying to get the computer booted back up, and failing, and trying 3 or 4 times to finish up the last 15 minutes of the show, only to have the computer crash time and time again. I gave up. We put out the podcast with what we had. End of the day came around, time to pick up the kids from school. Car doesn't start. Now, if the car brake lines had been cut, then I would start to really worry. And I did notice a sort of polonium taste to my Coke Zero today, but I don't know. I really doubt it. Anyway, yeah, the car wouldn't start, but those of you listening to the show know that has been a chronic problem as well. The van was on its last legs. It wasn't a terrible problem. I think it was cold out at the end of last week, and you may remember my problem is a cracked radiator. I think all the coolant leaked out. The radiator froze up. I refilled it, and it started again. It was nerve-wracking, and it was a signal that, yeah, this is about the end of the line for this car, so we had to finally pull the trigger on a van. Congratulations to me driving home in a new-to-you 2014 Honda Odyssey. I'm living the high life here. So we got computer repairs going on, a couple $100 there. The new van, several $1,000s there, of course. Let's see, the phone line. The phones were repaired for free because apparently I pay $15 a month for line insurance to Verizon. I don't know how... Maybe this is the first time in maybe, 15 years we've had a Verizon repairman coming out. $15 a month. I could probably do without that. These Obamacare phone premiums are outrageous. Help me, Donald Trump. Anyway, so that's where we stand. Now, it being the following week, and I guess this, if this works, we'll broadcast this for Wednesday, March 22nd. I usually come out and tell you what day it is. I don't even know what day it is. Right now, for me, of course, it's Tuesday, March 21st. You'll hear this, maybe, on Wednesday, March 22nd, at which point I assume Donald Trump will still be president. Big day yesterday. Hearings in the House Intelligence Committee. James Comey testifying. I saw a little bit of it. You will have discussed this amongst yourselves already, no doubt. Upshot of the hearings being, of course, James Comey came in and said, Donald Trump's lying about the wiretaps thing. More or less. But he didn't come out and say it. I don't want to characterize the tweets by the president, but I will say that we've found no evidence that indicates anything like a wiretap of his campaign headquarters. That raised red flags, of course, for some of you probably listening to this show, and you thought, will that clear it up? There probably weren't any wiretaps of the campaign apparatus, but, that wasn't really what Donald Trump necessarily said. He said wiretapping Trump Tower, and you and we wondered whether he might be thinking of the fact that they wiretapped other places in Trump Tower because it's stuffed to the rafters with Russian mobsters. Well, if you were reading Daily Kos yesterday, that would be Tuesday, which is today for me, but yesterday for you. Get it? You likely would have seen Mark Sumner writing on the front page. Why don't we just start with this one? The FBI did wiretap Trump Tower in 2013 because it's filled with Russian mobsters. It's almost as if he's been listening to the show. I don't actually believe that that's the case, but we'd welcome you, Mark. You can even come on the show and discuss what you found with us. We already know, because we're so super smart listening to Kagro in the morning. Years before Donald Trump rode his golden escalator into the presidential campaign, the FBI really did tap, with two P's, some phone lines in Trump Tower for a pretty good reason. What is that reason? For 2 years, ending in 2013, the FBI had a court-approved warrant to eavesdrop on a sophisticated Russian organized crime money laundering network that operated out of Unit 63A in Trump Tower. The FBI was particularly after Russian mafia boss, oh my goodness, there's another one with the pronunciation games, Alimzhan Toktaktunov. Let's say that. Alimzhan Toktaktunov, whose money laundering ring was bringing in millions into the U.S. from former Soviet republics. And where did these money laundering mobsters choose to set up shop? Some of the Russian mafia figures worked out of the 63rd floor unit in the iconic skyscraper. I wouldn't even call it that. Just 3 full floors below Trump's penthouse residence, running what prosecutors called an international money laundering, sports gambling, and extortion ring. Gotta have the extortion. All right. Well, isn't that a funny coincidence? He writes as a declarative statement and not an interrogatory. It's not like the floors in between are occupied by a real estate development company owned by post-Soviet oligarchs and operated by securities fraudster Felix Sater, otherwise known as those guys who built the Trump Soho, where Trump filmed The Apprentice, but who Trump claims not to know. Did Trump film The Apprentice there at Trump Soho? I didn't even realize that. But I thought that was on the 15th floor of Trump Tower. Anyway, this all according to the Financial Times, FT.com. But yes, remember when Trump said this? I don't know who owns Bayrock, Mr. Trump said. I never really understood who owned Bayrock. You don't understand anything. I know they're a developer that's done quite a bit of work, but I don't know how they have their ownership broken down. Those guys. It looks like Trump Tower was a one-size-fits-all money laundering superstore. And while the FBI grabbed some of the mobsters they were looking for in 2013, at least one of them slipped past them, only to turn up at Trump's Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. All the Trump properties. Gee whiz. 5 months after the April 2013 indictment and after Interpol issued a red notice for Toktakunov, the fugitive appeared at near Donald Trump, in the VIP section of the Moscow Miss Universe pageant. Trump had sold the Russian rights for Miss Universe to a billionaire Russian shopping mall developer. Okay, Trump world is just overwhelmingly full of giant-sized coincidence, writes Mark. It was following up on one of Toktakunov's associates that kept the phone wires at Trump Tower connected to the FBI through 2013. The Trump building was home to one of the top men in the alleged ring, Vadim Trincher, who pleaded guilty to racketeering and received a 5-year prison term. He is due to be released in July. Congratulations. Maybe you'll get pardoned by the president. Everything was moving in and out of there, said former FBI official Rich Frankel, now an ABC News consultant. Was there a wiretap at Trump Tower? Damn right there was, because Trump Tower is a hotbed of illegal activity, and it's just part of the open for business sign Trump hung out for Russian mobsters. There's another little bit here that says ABC News conducted a review of hundreds of pages of property records and reported in September that Trump-branded developments catered to large numbers of Russian buyers, including several who had brushes with the law. Russian buyers were particularly drawn to Trump-licensed condo towers in Hollywood and Sunny Isles, Florida. Hollywood, Florida, and Sunny Isles, Florida. There, for those of you following along, not Hollywood, California. Local real estate agents credited the Russian migration for turning the coastal Miami community into what they called Little Moscow. And they did call it that. And indeed, I have got an interesting piece somewhere in pocket here that discusses just that. It's really interesting. Not the ABC News investigation referred to up here. Is there a link to that one? I really would like to see that one. But I skimmed over this one by Reuters, and you'll have to excuse the mouse clicking noise. We're going to pick up a lot of that, I think, on our makeshift program. Who were the wealthy Russians investing in Trump luxury buildings, asks Nathan Lane, among others, over at Reuters. The Reuters investigation, it actually ended up, I guess that was an early title. Pocket gave me that one. The one they finally ran with, Russian elite invested nearly $100 million in Trump buildings. And I've skimmed through this thing, and it's interesting, and you'll hear some more names, some of which you'll recognize, some of which are new, popping up in this article if you skim through it. But I have read through this one, and that's a rare event for the show, having read through these things ahead of time. And I will say this, the Reuters look at who's investing in the Florida Trump buildings. It's not as target-rich an environment. They are, they've gotten a hold of a lot of money, $100 million worth of apartments. It says 63 individuals with Russian passports or addresses have bought at least $98.4 million worth of property in 7 Trump-branded luxury towers in southern Florida. And it's all true, but few, if any, of them appear to be owned by the people that we would really point to and call the Russian oligarchs. This is sort of a second and third tier Russian grifter circle, not many of whom appear to be very close to Putin or the circle of big-time oligarchs. But they're clearly, we'll take a look. Some of the people who are buying the apartments are, for one thing, people that you wouldn't ordinarily guess. I mean, we don't know that much about the Russian political system, I guess. I say we. I don't. Maybe you do. But these people seem like sort of mid to upper mid-level functionaries who somehow, magically, get a hold of something in the neighborhood of $2 million apiece, sometimes in cash, and use it to buy property in Florida. Why? Well, everybody loves property in Florida. It's a nice place to go and a nice place to visit. But as we've discussed on the show before, U.S. real estate laws, they set up rather nicely for money laundering, essentially. People who are selling real estate aren't held responsible for checking out who they're selling to. You just record the deed and that's it. And I mean, if law enforcement is looking to track things down, as long as you've recorded clearly and legally and accurately, they'll do the rest. But there's no prohibition for someone like Trump or anyone to sell a property if cash shows up to, Russian mobsters. And why are they doing this? Why are they bothering? In addition to being a nice place to live, Florida, leaving aside the question of taste in the decor of the buildings, but, no reason not to have a nice place in Florida if you can afford it by ripping off everybody in your provincial town in central Russia, let's say. But I think it clearly becomes known in Russian circles, both the top-level oligarchs and the mid-level functionaries who emulate their grifting, that Donald Trump is the man to see if, one, you want to buy a luxury-style apartment. I say luxury-style. I don't know if they're that luxurious. But I guess to Russians, their idea of, at least these Russians, their idea of what's going to be luxurious in the United States is the Donald Trump thing. So everything's spray-painted gold. Well, we can't even get gold spray-paint in Russia. Dictator chic, as many people have referred to it. So, one, there's that. And two, it I think becomes known that he's the guy who doesn't ask questions. I suspect that the Russians may suspect that buying real estate in America could be perilous for them, generally. But that word got out that Donald Trump makes it pretty easy. And Donald Trump knows that there's a lot of money that can be brought in from Russia, and he's open to taking it, whereas other people might be suspicious. Donald Trump is the guy to see for gaudy, luxury-style apartments. He won't ask any questions. He doesn't have to. That's the law. He's not doing anything wrong, but he won't. They don't know whether it's the law or not. They probably think America, tracks everything, or the FBI does anyway. And they should worry about that because they're mobsters. Anyway, take a look at this thing here. The Reuters investigation datelined Miami and Moscow. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Donald J. Trump downplayed his business ties with Russia, and since taking office as president, he has been even more emphatic. I can tell you, speaking for myself, I own nothing in Russia. President Trump said at a news conference last month, I have no loans in Russia. I don't have any deals in Russia. You remember that press conference. That was never the question, of course. In the United States, members of the Russian elite have invested in Trump buildings. It's not the other way around. A Reuters review has found that at least 63 individuals with Russian passports or addresses who have bought at least $98.4 million worth of property in 7 Trump-branded luxury towers in southern Florida. That, according to all the public documents, also a series of interviews and corporate records that they've been able to find wherever the hell Reuters people look for them. I don't know. Doesn't matter. We have the results. The buyers include politically connected businessmen, such as a former executive in a Moscow-based state-run construction firm that works on military and intelligence facilities. There's also the founder of a St. Petersburg investment bank and the co-founder of a conglomerate with interests in banking, property, and electronics. People from the second and third tiers of Russian power have invested in the Trump buildings as well. One recently posted a photo of himself with the leader of, get this one, a Russian motorcycle gang. I didn't realize they had them. That was sanctioned by the United States for its alleged role in Moscow's seizure of Crimea. That's really astounding to me. Not only, I mean, I didn't. It never occurred to me that they would have motorcycle gangs, for one thing. I don't know. I mean, the old Russia is a police state. You don't have that kind of stuff. Back in the good old days, when they were really cracking down and had law and order, I don't know. There's something to that, I think, in the throwback to KGB days with Vladimir Putin. Anyway, but now, of course, the Fox is running the hen house, and there's motorcycle gangs. And what a motorcycle gang. Like, it's been years since the United States had a motorcycle gang that had the gumption to help invade and annex territory. Those Russians are way ahead of the game here. Really, a motorcycle gang sanctioned by the United States for a role in helping Moscow seize Crimea. All right. Maybe they just thought that's the place to go. Crime, we're going to go there because we love crime. Not all motorcycle gangs do, ladies and gentlemen. Don't stereotype. This one does, but okay. The Reuters review of investors from Russia in Trump's Florida condominium buildings found no suggestion of wrongdoing by President Trump or his real estate organization. That in part because there's hardly anything you can do wrong as a real estate organization so long as you record a deed when you sell something to somebody. And if they want to buy it as, Smith Inc. LLC, not that much you can do about it. All right. So no wrongdoing by President Trump is suggested here, and none of the buyers appear to be from Putin's inner circle. The White House referred questions from Reuters to the Trump Organization, whose chief legal officer said the scrutiny of the president's business ties with Russia was misplaced. I can say definitively that this is an overblown story that is media created, Alan Garton said in an interview. I've been around this company and I know the company's dealings. The tally of investors from Russia may be conservative, as it turns out. The analysis found that at least 703, or about one-third, of the owners of the 2,044 units in the 7 Trump buildings in Florida are limited liability companies, or LLCs, which have the ability to hide the identity of a property's true owner. 700 times over. And the nationality of many buyers could not be determined either. As it turns out, Russian Americans who didn't use a Russian address or passport in their purchases wouldn't have been included in this tally. The review focused on Florida because the state has a large concentration of Trump-branded buildings, and determining the ownership of properties is easier there than in some states. The resort town of Sunny Isles Beach, site of 6 of the 7 Trump-branded Florida residential towers, stands out in another way. The zip code that includes the Sunny Isles, the buildings anyway, has an estimated 1,200 Russian-born residents. The most, among the most anyway, in the country, U.S. Census data shows. The Trump Organization advertises all 7 Florida buildings on its website as it pursues similar branding deals around the world. Exactly how much income Trump has earned from the buildings is unclear. 6 of the 7 properties were the product of an agreement with the New York property magnate, which the New York property magnate, that's Trump, struck in 2001 with father and son American developers Michael and Gil Deezer, D-E-Z-E-R. The 6 buildings operated by the Deezers in Sunny Isles would bear Trump's name under a licensing agreement. In an interview, Gil Deezer said the project generated $2 billion in initial sales, from which Trump took a commission. Deezer declined to say how large a commission, citing confidentiality agreements. Garton, the Trump Organization's chief legal officer, said Trump's income was a mix of flat fees and percentages, but declined to disclose them. Edgardo de Fortuna, a leading Miami developer, estimated that Trump likely made between 1% and 4% in initial sales commissions based on the standard fee paid on similarly branded projects. If so, Trump stood to reap a total of $20 million to $80 million in Sunny Isles. Trump receives no commission on subsequent sales in all 7 of the Florida residential towers. He continues to make money from one of the 6 Sunny Isles buildings, however, according to disclosure forms Trump filed in the presidential race. One of the few things he actually bothered to disclose, I guess. The disclosure form states that Trump received between $100,000 and $1 million, that's a big range, from a business called Trump Marks Sunny Isles 1, Roman numeral 1, LLC. Typical of the way they name their LLCs and organizations like this. Deezer said the funds came from the Trump International Beach Resort, a hotel and condominium complex. Trump reported no income in his disclosure form from his 7th Florida property, the Trump Hollywood, in the city of Hollywood. How much he has made over the years from that property's 200 units is unclear. BH3, an investment fund which took over 180 units in a foreclosure sale, paid Trump a licensing fee of $25,000 for each unit, according to Daniel Liebensohn, a principal at the BH3 fund. If the remaining 20 units generated the same fee, Trump's take would have been $5 million. Garten declined to confirm Trump's commission. Informed of the Reuters analysis of Trump's Russian condo investors, 2 Democratic opponents of the president, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and Congressman Adam Schiff of California, renewed their calls for greater disclosure of his finances. While the president has denied having invested in Russia, he has said little or nothing about Russian investment in his business and properties in the United States or elsewhere, said Adam Schiff, ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. This should concern all Americans, and is yet another reason why his refusal to release his tax returns should be met with considerable skepticism and concern. Senator Richard Burr and Representative Devin Nunes of California, the Republican chairs of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, declined to comment. Schiff, as well as 2 U.S. intelligence officials and 1 former senior law enforcement official who spoke on condition of anonymity, said the Russian government sometimes directs funding at prominent individuals in the United States and Europe in hopes of improving their perception of Russia. Reuters found no evidence of such an effort with Trump. Garten, the Trump Organization's chief legal officer, scoffed at the idea. "This is politics at its worst," he said. The next section here is entitled Russian Elite, and they're not as elite as they are in some of the other concentrations of Russian emigres, I guess you might try to call them, like Trump Tower, but okay. One wealthy Russian buyer, begin here. The glimpse inside the condominium dealings offers a look at how the wealthy in Putin's Russia use foreign property to stow cash. Not the wealthiest, they also do that, but this is sort of the mid-level folks. One wealthy Russian buyer was Alexander Yuzvik. In 2010, he and his wife bought Unit 3901 of Trump Palace in Sunny Isles for $1.3 million, according to Florida property records. The 3-bedroom apartment has 2,100 square feet, panoramic views, etc. From 2013 to 2016, Yuzvik was a senior executive at Spetstroy, a state-owned company that has carried out construction projects at military facilities. The Spetstroy website says the firm was involved in construction projects at the Moscow Training Academy of the FSB, Russia's primary civilian intelligence service and successor to the KGB. Spetstroy also did construction work in the administrative building of the General Staff of the GRU, which is Russia's military intelligence service. In a statement to Reuters, Spetstroy and Yuzvik Spetstroy said Yuzvik worked there until he stepped down in March of 2016. Employees of some state-owned Russian companies are typically required to disclose their assets and income. Yuzvik and his wife declared in 2013, in a publicly available declaration, they list only assets inside Russia. The Florida condo isn't included in their disclosure. Yuzvik could not be reached for comment. Andrei Truskov, another Trump condo owner, is a founder and co-owner of Absolute Group LLC, a holding company involved in wholesale electronics, banking, and property development with projects in Moscow, London, and New York. The wholesale electronic business is the biggest in Russia, according to, that's what an Absolute representative told Reuters anyway. The company does not disclose its financial results. Truskov bought apartment 1102 in the Trump Hollywood for $1.4 million in 2011. Another 3-bedroom, 3.5-bath unit, 3,100 square feet, according to the online real estate listings. In a telephone interview, Truskov confirmed that he purchased the Trump Hollywood unit. He said the Florida apartment was the same price as a 3-bedroom apartment. A 3-room apartment outside Moscow at the time. Wow. And Florida was a nice place to have a property. I don't know whether it's true that 1.2, 1.3, either way, $1.4 million for a 3-room apartment outside Moscow, or a 3-bedroom, 3.5-bath, 3,100 square feet number in the Trump Hollywood. Okay. Well, if that's true, sure, why not? He said the purchase was a personal decision and had no connection with his business. Several wealthy buyers were from Moscow and St. Petersburg, the country's 2 largest cities, according to interviews in Russia and the Florida Public Records and the Bureau Van Dyke Company database, Orbis. Okay. Among them, other wealthy dudes, Alexei Yusteyev, the founder and president of St. Petersburg-based Viking Bank. That has nothing to do with Iceland, I'm sure, Viking. One of the first private investment banks established in Russia after the fall of communism. A donor to orphanages and chess clubs in St. Petersburg, Yusteyev has received awards from the Russian Sports Ministry and the St. Petersburg Chamber of Commerce for his banking and charitable work, according to his biography on the bank's website. And I'm sure it's true. In 2009, Yusteyev bought Unit 5006, a 3-bed, 3.5-bath apartment in the Trump Palace complex in Sunny Isles, $1.2 million in cash, according to Florida Public Records. 2 years later, Yusteyev bought another apartment, a penthouse unit, this time in the nearby Trump Royale condominium development, for $5.2 million. That is, the Trump Royale is, we call the Trump with cheese here in the United States, in case you were wondering. In an email reply to questions, Yusteyev said he purchased the properties in the Trump buildings for private use, but declined to comment on his family's U.S. business. I am living in Russia. I am working in Russia. I am going abroad only for business purposes or vacations, he said. Many of the Russian buyers were from the country's provinces as well. One is Oleg Misevra, a wealthy coal magnate and former traffic police commander. He's made good, huh? Whose company's main assets are in the Pacific island of Sakhalin in Russia's Far East. Remember Sakhalin Island? Yeah, that's why they shot down the Korean airliner there, to protect Oleg Misevra's coal deposits, I guess. He has caught Putin's eye, Misevra has, at a 2010 regional meeting of Putin's United Russia Party. Putin praised Misevra's work and held a lengthy question and answer session with him. A corporation Misevra controls, Swiss Residence Alliance, Inc. It's Allianz, really. I mean, there's only one L in that. Purchased penthouse number 1 in Trump Hollywood for $6.8 million in 2010. The 6-bedroom duplex is 8,200 square feet and boasts 12-foot ceilings, according to real estate listings. Misevra did not respond to requests for comment. Some of the Russian buyers appear to have done well in America. Another local politician, Vadim Valerievich Gataulin, let's say, bought an apartment for $3.5 million in the Trump Hollywood. He did the deal through a company registered in Florida called VVG Real Estate Investments, LLC. It's a lot of initials. VVG Real Estate, Vadim Valerovich Gataulin. Okay, another creative guy. 5 years later, Gataulin sold the apartment for $4.1 million, not bad, to a Delaware-based limited liability company whose owner is not identified in state records. Great. In early 2012, Gataulin bought a second apartment in the same building, Unit 2701, for $920,000, according to Florida records. Several months later, he sold the apartment for $1.1 million to a couple from Venezuela, property records show. Gataulin is from the semi-autonomous Russian Republic of Bashkortostan. Bashkortostan. One of the ones with which I'm less familiar. Bashkortostan, an oil-producing region, sure, in the foothills of the Ural Mountains. The son of a deputy regional prosecutor, he was a deputy in the regional parliament from 2013 until 2015. As a member of the regional parliament, he was required to declare his income and assets under Russian federal law, according to a representative of the Bashkortostan regional parliament. A copy of the income declaration he filed for 2013, when he was still owner of the second Trump unit, contains no mention of the apartment. Gataulin did not respond to messages sent to his company in Bashkortostan. More recently, he has been actively investing in the Miami area. His VVG Real Estate has spent at least $28 million, on Broward County properties between 2012 and 2016. He also bought and sold 6 properties in Miami-Dade County between 2015 and 2016 for total profits of $238,400, property records show. VVG is also the registered licensee on a small motel close to the beach in Hollywood. An employee there told Reuters that Gataulin appears and disappears like a ghost and was currently in Russia. A secretary at Gataulin's holding company in Russia told Reuters that he's not in Russia. All right. The American experience has been a mixed one for some of the Trump buyers, among them Pavel Yuglanov, a businessman who served as Deputy Minister for Industry and Energy in the regional government of Saratov. Saratov? I don't know. In central Russia from 2010 to 2011. Yuglanov bought Unit 3704 in Trump Hollywood for $1.8 million in 2012. He sold the 3-bed, 3,395, almost 3,400 square foot apartment for $2.9 million 2 years later. Pretty good. Back in Russia, Yuglanov made unsuccessful runs for the Saratov City Assembly in 2006 and 2011, the second time as a member of Putin's United Russia party. After leaving his deputy ministership in 2011, Yuglanov and his then-wife Anastasia they moved to Florida. Anastasia said in an interview in her Miami apartment that her ex-husband never told her why. I don't know what goes on in a man's head, she said. Okay. In Miami, Yuglanov opened a gas station called Nico Petroleum. When that business struggled, he sold it. He then started a charter boat business and a trucking firm. They struggled too. Yuglanov did not have connections in the United States like he did in Russia, and he didn't understand how Americans do business, his ex-wife said. Last August, Yuglanov posted a photograph of himself on his Facebook page, posing alongside Alexander Zaldostanov, leader of the Night Wolves biker gang. There it is. The Wolves and Zaldostanov personally were made subject to U.S. financial and travel restrictions. The U.S. government said gang members stormed a Ukrainian government naval base and a gas facility during Russia's annexation of Crimea. That is fascinating. Our biker gangs are real slouches by comparison. What did they have? A gunfight at, what was Twin Peaks restaurant not that long ago? Scary and all that, but they're not storming government naval bases or gas facilities for that matter. That's very interesting. An aide to Zaldostanov. The motorcycle gang guy has an aide. An aide to him did not respond to questions from Reuters, amazingly. The group, in interviews with Russian media, has denied storming the base and the gas facility. So they're on record as saying no. They're not terrorists. They're not looking for publicity. Very interesting. Zaldostinov has had multiple meetings with Putin, according to the Kremlin's website. So it's open. The Russian president awarded Zaldostinov the country's Medal of Honor in 2013. Wow. I don't know that it's the same level of recognition as our own Congressional Medal of Honor, but that's interesting. In a phone interview late last month, Yuglanov confirmed the Trump apartment purchase. He said it was a personal matter and declined to answer questions. Basically, my private life is not your business, he said. Okay, and just by way of reflecting this into the record here, there's a picture of Yuglanov and Zaldostinov here. And Yuglanov looks every bit the Russian businessman dude. He's in casual clothing here, but whatever. Zaldostinov is in less clothing than the other guy. He's shirtless. He's a big muscular dude with lots of tattoos, as bikers often are. Although a lot of times they're not necessarily muscular, but this guy is. That's why he's shirtless all the time. Plus, you can see his tattoos. Got a big beard, a full beard, not a ZZ Top beard, but a big full beard, and what looks to be long hair, maybe pulled back in a ponytail behind his back. You can't really see it. Anyway, I guess they look the parts. They're from Central Casting, Donald. You can call them. All right, so what's up here? The Rainmaker is our next section for Deezer, the American partner in Sunny Isles. The 6 buildings have been a win for his family, the Trumps, and Sunny Isles. Trump visited the sites at least 4 times as the buildings, including a hotel, were constructed and promoted between 2001 and 2011, according to Deezer and former employees of Deezer's company. Trump had an approval over the look of the buildings and the apartments, Deezer said. His people were very much involved in control and construction. They were down here once every quarter checking on us, on the progress. They wanted to see that we were making money. Then in 2008, when the housing market crashed, buyers defaulted on 900 Trump apartments. Woof, according to Deezer. Deezer said he worked hard over the coming years to pay back creditors. Until those 900 apartments were sold off, Trump did not earn any money from them, he said. Foreign buyers bought into the Trump buildings as the developers dropped their prices after the crash, according to Deezer and local realtors. The majority of these buyers were from South America, with a smaller percentage of Russians and other former Soviet nationals. Tanya Tsveyer, Tsveyer, maybe. A realtor whose Russian clients have bought in the Trump buildings described her customers as primarily business people, including several with investments across the United States and Russia. They bought in the Trump because they liked how the buildings fit their lifestyle, she said, referring to the Russians. By early 2011, the Trump buildings had started to turn a profit, according to Deezer. He invited Trump to a mortgage-burning ceremony to celebrate Deezer's paying off the project's $475 million mortgage. Deezer recalled Trump telling him that he planned to run for president. Okay, why not? That's 2011? Okay, and he was flirting with it at that point. And again, I guess I'll just pause here to comment on the idea of the building fitting the Russian lifestyle. And I suppose it does. In old school Russia and Soviet Russia, that was if you lived in the cities, living in a gigantic apartment building was not unusual at all. That was the only choice for the most part. And it probably fits their lifestyle because they've gotten a hold of some private riches now, and everything is spray painted gold here, and so it looks like it's supposed to, and it fits their aesthetic. And some of this is non-nefarious, right? Some of this, the Russian preference for Trump buildings probably comes from the fact that it looks good. It looks like I want it to look. It's got nice gold painted fixtures, lots of luxury, whatever. So it fits their aesthetic. But I think there's also other non-nefarious things like, I want to live near other Russians, or my friend bought in this tower and I'd like to live near him, or maybe just a matter of, my friend bought in this tower and I'm kind of nervous about going to the United States and just buying an apartment in a place that's unknown, and how will I get along, and will it be good? I want to take my friend's recommendation. I want to live near where they are. I want to deal with a real estate agent who speaks Russian, maybe. So, not necessarily every part of it is nefarious. Of course, it all starts, I think, with word getting around that Trump won't ask you a whole bunch of stupid questions that'll make you nervous about laundering your money here. He knows the game, and he knows what he can and can't get in trouble for, and he's willing to take your money and turn it into more. Anyway, so, okay, back to the mortgage burning party to which Deezer invites Donald Trump, and Donald Trump tells him he plans to run for president, not instead of going to the party, though, because he does show up at the party. Deezer, his father, and Trump gleefully set flame to a stack of mortgage documents, applauded by a crowd of tenants from the Trump buildings and local business people. A video of the event shows Trump smiling, joking, and working the crowd. This is his joke, too. This is great. The very Trump phrasing at plus, randomness. I guess he sees the fire and says, I was with Michael Jackson when he had the hair burned with the Pepsi, and it was a disaster. Trump told revelers, referring to the time the pop superstar's hair caught fire during the 1984 filming of a Pepsi commercial. I am sitting next to that friggin' fire, and if my hair goes, I am out of business. That's, semi-funny. Is it true? Does anybody know whether he was actually there during the filming of that Pepsi commercial? That's the sort of thing he would claim without it actually being true. So it's not a big deal. It's just another thing, but whatever. Another log on the fire, we'll say. How about that? Deezer and Trump got help selling the condos from Elena Baronoff, who immigrated from the Soviet Union in the 1980s. Baronoff, who grew up in Uzbekistan, and I can say that one, had been active in Soviet cultural associations. In Miami, she soon began bringing Russian tour groups to Miami. Gil Deezer's father, Michael, recruited Baronoff to work alongside the Deezer Corporation. She traveled to Moscow, St. Petersburg, France, and London to bring in Russian buyers, according to Deezer, selling apartments to them for between $1 million and $2 million. Baronoff was diagnosed with leukemia in 2014 and died a year later. She was huge. She was big for them, Deezer said, referring to the Russian buyers. No one has filled her shoes. So, that's actually the end of the piece there. And like I said, it doesn't have the juiciest details, but it's got great background information, fills in some of the blanks, and of course gives us the opportunity to contemplate this a little bit and get our heads around the idea that not every single piece of this stuff is necessarily nefarious, but once the first piece is in place, it all starts to fall into place. And right down to the detail, which I had forgotten about, but I think it's pretty easily predictable, just sending a salesperson to Russia and saying, if you have cash you want to park overseas, great way to do it, real estate. Great person to do it with, Donald Trump. He doesn't ask a whole lot of questions. Lots of Russian mobsters live in his buildings. Lots of them live in the building he lives in, the Trump Tower in New York. If you don't have Trump Tower money, you can own Trump Royale place down in Florida. The weather's warmer anyway. You might rather be down there. $1 million, $2 million. No questions asked where you got the money. You can be a traffic cop. You can be a city commissioner. If you got $2 million, we'll give you a place in a Trump building. And it's nice. It's, like we said, it's painted gold. It fits the dictator chic look. Your friends are buying there. Half the building speaks Russian. We can do the deal in Russian. It makes Russians very comfortable. And why do you want to make Russians comfortable? You always want to make your customers comfortable, true. And they are making a lot of money there. And, I guess the non-nefarious explanation for concentrating on Russia is if you can send a salesperson there and they come back and say, I sold 5 $1 million plus units in a 3-day trip to Moscow, I'd say, go back. Try again, and you sell another. I guess I'd just say keep going back until Russians run out of money. I don't care, who they are, if they occupy the building. I just want to sell the units. And if sitting in an office in the lobby waiting for Americans to walk in and buy this gaudy crap isn't working, then by all means go to Russia and sell it there. And I guess it was a bottomless pit. They just kept coming up with money. So that's sort of like the semi-non-nefarious explanation, right? You just go there. I don't know who these people are. They show up with money, and I take it and give them the deed to a unit. What do I care? Of course, underlying all of that really is the knowledge that the reason you never hit the bottom of the well going back to Moscow on sales trips is there are so many people who've stolen so much money and need so desperately to get it out of the country and convertible to dollars that no one will ask questions about, and they have someplace to escape to if everything goes south. I guess if everything goes south, you don't want to go south, but somebody else is south. If everything goes to South Russia, to the Crimea, let's say, you can escape to the south of the United States. It makes sense as an investment because they're criminals in many cases, and because in many cases the money is stolen, and because in many cases they value very highly the no questions asked ability to convert their stolen rubles into clean-ish American dollars, or at least resellable American real estate, that the party never stops. It doesn't necessarily mean that Trump is interested in selling only to thieves from Russia. It's just, I sell whenever we go to Russia. And the only people with money to buy this stuff in Russia are thieves, but that's not my problem. That's Russia's problem. When they come to the United States, if they behave themselves, what do I care? It's a very good racket, and they're doing very well by it. That's all I can say. I don't know. It's very weird. In the meantime, lots of other things happening right here at home that we could be paying attention to, and we'll bring you the updates and some of the, maybe we'll spend the day doing these more deep dive things than up to the minute news, because that can change in a second in the world of the Trump tweet rage. All right. So I don't know. I thought that went well with Mark's piece here. Let's shift subjects just a little bit, though, and move on to our next. Okay, so a good follow-up on that might be a piece that Hunter put out. It hadn't reached the front page anyway at the time I've picked it up here. But this is just an interesting new angle. And Hunter summarizes a McClatchy article here that we'll start with Hunter's summary because I think he gets to the heart of things. That's the point of the way we abbreviate some of these things on the front page at Daily Kos. Federal agents investigating possible collusion between Russian operatives and Breitbart.com. That's a thing. Let's take a look at that one. And we're unsure as to where this is going. I'll let Hunter tell you the story. Sure, he starts. Let's throw this into the mix as well. That's what I'm doing. U.S. counterintelligence officials are investigating whether figures at a number of far-right websites, including Breitbart, quote-unquote, news, the white nationalist allied site then managed by Donald Trump's top advisor Steve Bannon, were themselves coordinating with Russian agents. Really? Operatives for Russia appear to have strategically timed the computer commands, known as bots, to blitz social media with links to the pro-Trump stories from Breitbart and other sites at times when the billionaire businessman, and I'm not sure he's a billionaire, was on the defensive in his race against Democrat Hillary Clinton, these sources said. Investigators examining the bot attacks are exploring whether the far-right news operations took any actions to assist Russia's operatives. Their participation, however, wasn't necessary for the bots to amplify their news through Twitter and Facebook. And that's a very important point in all of this. And Hunter gets it. He knows his tech inside and out, as you know. But still worth bringing up. And here's why. It's not at all clear why, Hunter continues, why FBI investigators would be probing this. Building bots to heavily promote pro-Trump narratives churned out by Breitbart and other far-right websites requires no input at all from those sites themselves. It's not even immediately clear what such coordination would even consist of. At the same time, FBI Director James Comey patiently explained to congressional questioners just yesterday, 2 days ago, for those of you listening to the podcast, that such investigations are not undertaken unless there is a credible allegation of wrongdoing. And that's a quote, credible allegation of wrongdoing, which means counterintelligence officers have seen something about the link between far-right news sites and Russian intelligence efforts that has convinced them they need to examine that relationship further. So that's a hell of a thing. And that's actually Hunter's conclusion there. And it really is. And it makes me want to see the McClatchy piece on that subject. Let's click through to it. You can hear me clicking for realistic background ambiance. Here's the piece here. FBI's Russian influence probe includes a look at Breitbart and also InfoWars, the Alex Jones news site. They don't enclose news in quotes here. Only Hunter was bold enough to do that. This is Peter Stone and Greg Gordon writing for McClatchy. And I don't know, something about the way McClatchy approaches things. I like the way they do this stuff. All right. Here's their story. Federal investigators are examining whether far-right news sites played any role last year in a Russian cyber operation that dramatically widened the reach of news stories, some fictional, that favored Donald Trump's presidential bid. Two people familiar with the inquiry say. Operatives for Russia appear to have strategically timed the computer commands known as bots, we read this part, to blitz social media with links to pro-Trump stories at a time when the billionaire businessman, maybe, was on the defensive in his race, et cetera, right? The bots' end products were largely millions of Twitter and Facebook posts carrying links to stories on conservative internet sites such as Breitbart News and InfoWars, as well as on the Kremlin-backed RT News and Sputnik News, the sources said. No surprises there, I guess. Some of the stories were false or mixed fact with fiction, said the sources, who spoke on condition of anonymity because the bot attacks are part of an FBI-led investigation into a multifaceted Russian operation to influence last year's elections. Investigators examining the bot attacks are exploring whether the far-right news operations took any actions to assist Russia's operatives. Their participation, however, wasn't necessary for the bots to amplify their news through Twitter and Facebook. The investigation of the bot-engineered traffic, which appears to be in its early stages, is being driven by the FBI's counterintelligence division, whose inquiries rarely result in criminal charges, and whose main task has been to reconstruct the nature of the Kremlin cyber attack and determine ways to prevent another. An FBI spokesman declined to comment on the inquiry into the use of bots. Russia-generated bots are one piece of a cyber puzzle that counterintelligence agents have sought to solve for nearly a year to determine the extent of the Moscow government's electronic broadside. This may be one of the most highly impactful information operations in the history of intelligence, said one former U.S. intelligence official who spoke on condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the matter. Bureau Director James Comey confirmed Monday at a House Intelligence Committee hearing what has long been reported, that the FBI is investigating possible links between individuals in the Trump presidential campaign and the Russian campaign to influence the election, and whether there was any coordination between the two. The ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, one of multiple congressional panels examining Russia's intervention, said on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday that there was, quote, circumstantial evidence of collusion, unquote. There also is, quote, direct evidence of deception, there's ellipses, direct evidence, ellipses, of deception, and that's where we begin the investigation, said Representative Adam Schiff of California. U.S. intelligence agencies charged in January that Russian President Vladimir Putin had ordered the offensive, in which cyber operatives also hacked tens of thousands of emails from the DNC staff, Clinton campaign chair John Podesta, and other Dems. A top priority of investigators is to determine who delivered those hacked emails to WikiLeaks, a London-based transparency site that published them online, the sources said. News stories about the emails embarrassed Clinton at key points in the campaign. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has denied that the Russian government was the source of the email dump. Of course, it would be more helpful if he would deny that they were Russian connected in any way. But I don't know that he wants to cooperate. As for the bots, they carried links not only to news stories but also to Democratic emails posted on WikiLeaks, especially those hacked from Podesta and made public in October, said Philip Howard, a professor at the Oxford University Internet Institute, who has researched the bot attacks. Howard said that, as an example, bots had spread links to fictional stories that accused Clinton of involvement in running a child sex ring in the basement of a Washington pizza parlor. You all know that story. The posts inspired a North Carolina man to drive to Washington and fire an assault weapon in the restaurant, according to police reports. Howard's study of bot-generated Twitter traffic during last fall's Trump-Clinton campaign debates showed that bot messages favorable to Trump significantly outnumbered those sympathetic to Clinton. He said his research showed that Americans who call themselves patriotic programmers also activated bots to aid Trump. In interviews, they described coding the computer commands in their spare time, Howard said. Unlike counterintelligence investigators with more cyber sleuthing capabilities, Howard has not established that Russia was the source of the bot attacks he studied. Russia also used trolls, which they enclose in quotes here, but I assure you they are trolls, hundreds of computer operatives who pretended to be Trump supporters and posted stories or comments on the internet complimentary to Trump or disparaging to Clinton. Sources close to the inquiry said those operatives likely worked from a facility in St. Petersburg, Russia, dedicated to that tactic. Russian bots and internet trolls sought to propagate stories underground, said Mike Carpenter, a former senior Pentagon official during the Obama administration whose job focused on Russia. Those stories got amplified by fringe elements of our media, like Breitbart. The very carefully timed release of information to shift the news cycle away from stories that clearly hurt Mr. Trump, such as his inappropriate conduct over the years, he said, referring to the October release of a video in which Trump bragged about grabbing women's genitals. That's McClatchy's cleaned up version of it, if that's clean. I don't know. The event corresponded with a surge in bot-related traffic spreading anti-Clinton stories. An additional Russian tool was the news from its prime propaganda machine, Russia Today, with a global television and digital media operation and a U.S. arm, RT America. Last November 19th, Breitbart announced that its website traffic had set a record the previous 31 days with 300 million page views, driven substantially by social media. Breitbart, which has drawn criticism for pursuing a white nationalist agenda, was formerly led by Stephen Bannon, who became chief executive of Trump's election campaign last August, and now serves as Trump's strategic advisor in the White House. The news site's former national security editor, Sebastian Gorka, was a national security advisor to Trump's campaign and presidential transition team. He now works as a key Trump counterterrorism advisor. Breitbart's chief executive officer, Larry Solov, did not respond to phone and email requests seeking comment. Bannon and Gorka have controversial profiles, one might say. Bannon has been accused of taking anti-immigrant and racist positions. Last week, the Jewish newspaper Forward reported that Gorka had taken a lifelong loyalty oath to a Hungarian far-right group that for decades was allied with the Nazi Party. That's great. We haven't caught up with Gorka just yet. I have a ton of articles waiting. But let's go on. The White House declined to respond to questions about Gorka. Breitbart is partially owned by Robert Mercer, another great link for us, the wealthy co-chief executive of a New York hedge fund and a co-owner of Cambridge Analytica. We know all of this, right? A small London-based firm credited with giving Trump a significant advantage in gauging voter priorities last year by providing his campaign with at least 5,000 data points on each of 220 million Americans. InfoWars is published by Alex Jones, a Texas-based conservative talk show host known for embracing conspiracy theories, such as one asserting that the U.S. government was involved in the terrorist attacks of September 11th. During the 2016 campaign, Infowars.com was a loyal Trump public relations tool. Trump was on Jones's show and praised his reporting. It's the major source of everything, said Roger Stone, another person allegedly under the FBI microscope, a longtime Trump confidant and campaign advisor, he said last fall. Stone, who has regularly appeared on Jones's show and was on Monday, said he believes an FBI investigation into his campaign role. He invites an FBI investigation into his campaign role. The Senate Intelligence Committee has asked Stone to preserve documents in connection with the Russian election inquiry. Jones responded to questions from McClatchy on his talk show. And he probably screamed this: "I'm not going to sit here and say I'm not a Russian stooge because it's a expletive lie." What? Huh. Okay, whatever. I think we know what he thinks he means. That's what he said, denying any contact with the Kremlin operatives about bots. He said this issue stemmed from this whole ridiculous narrative of the bitching left. Bitching, yo. Oh, well. It's as if we didn't build InfoWars, he said. It's as if we don't have a huge audience. That doesn't really even insinuate that, but whatever. Noting he had appeared on RT probably 100 times or more, he said sarcastically, "There's my Russian connection." And there it is. You're right. Boosted by bots, the surge in readership for such websites amplified Clinton's negatives. Some stories falsely described her health problems as dire. Jones said Monday that people gravitated to his website, quote, "because we were the first to report Hillary Clinton falling down," unquote. What a scoop. What a scoop. Poof. Take the picture, right? Anyway, I think the poof comes first anyway. He referred to Clinton appearing to collapse last September 11th after visiting the World Trade Center Memorial. She was diagnosed with pneumonia. I almost screwed up the pronunciation of pneumonia. Maybe I have it. The full impact of the bots was subterranean and corrosive. Podesta, Clinton's campaign chairman, told McClatchy in an interview, "The distribution channels were being flooded with this information. We perhaps underestimated the strategy of pushing fake news out through social media and how it impacted the race." Donna Brazile, the former interim director of the DNC, said that neither the party committee nor the Clinton campaign had used bots to widen the reach of their anti-Trump message. At least one of the congressional committees investigating the Russian meddling is looking into the bots. The Senate Intelligence Committee intends to look actively at fake news, quote-unquote fake news, and the ways that Russian bots and trolls were used to influence the election, said Rachel Cohen, a spokeswoman for Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the panel's ranking Democrat. Russia's offensive might have been anticipated from a speech a top Kremlin official made in February of 2016. In this speech in Moscow, Andrei Krustik, wow. You know how it is with these Russian names. Krut, K-R-U-T, Krutskik, S-K-I-K-H. Let's guess that that's it. Told a conference of Russian computer security officials that the Putin government would be unleashing a cyber nuclear attack reminiscent of Russia's 1949 development of the atom bomb. Oh, he said that? Krutskik, whose speech was first reported by Washington Post columnist David Ignatius and independently confirmed by McClatchy, also reportedly said the offensive would cause U.S. officials to gain respect for Russia's cyber capabilities. I think that's fair to say we have. Russia has again figured out from its old Soviet playbook that its greatest weapon in the world is information, said Lauren Goodrich, senior Eurasia analyst at the Stratfor Corporation, a global intelligence firm based in Austin, Texas. Its information and disinformation campaigns have skyrocketed. She said the Kremlin's budget for public information, quote-unquote public information, had quadrupled this year as it mounted similar cyber attacks on behalf of right-wing candidates in France, Germany, and other European countries. So, it's there. It's real. I thought I would bring that one out. That's an interesting angle on it. Not so much necessarily for the FBI investigation part, since the article noted that rarely results in criminal charges, but just interesting that they're trying to figure this stuff out. And I think particularly interesting for raising the possibility that Breitbart and, to some extent, InfoWars was involved in some way. Again, it's hard to figure how. I mean, you certainly don't need their cooperation. The bot programmers can just say, I think it would be pretty reliable for them to say, just take whatever is on the front page of Breitbart or InfoWars pretty much at any given time. If you really don't want to put any work into it, just take whatever's there. But, you know, if you've got an English speaker, read the articles that come up on the front page and find the ones that would be good for Trump or bad for Clinton and let the bot army go to work on that. You probably didn't need to do any additional work prompting Breitbart or InfoWars to generate more such content. They were always going to do that for you. So by itself, the fact that the Russian bots had so much to work with doesn't point to any sort of collusion. But again, they're checking into it not because someone said it could be true, but because they have some credible evidence that it was true. And I wouldn't put it past anybody either. I mean, I don't know how well the Russian bot army understood Breitbart or InfoWars. That is, could they have advised them as an American reader or someone who understands, where they're coming from and their role in American politics, could probably have told them, you don't need to do anything to encourage them to create any more such content. You have a charge from whoever it is that's employing you to find such content and boost its visibility with bots. I can tell you, you could probably go to sleep, just put your feet up and nap every day at the office. Just take whatever shows up at Breitbart on its own with no encouragement from you. That will likely get the job done, but it may well have been that somebody either didn't trust that to be the case or thought, and it's probably not, it's not outlandish for them to have thought, well, maybe we could communicate a little bit with the editors there and make sure that they know that we're interested in amplifying this stuff. And that way they would provide, they would be incentivized even further to provide still more of the content. Should they ever tire of it or feel like it just wasn't worth trying to whip up a frenzy about any particular piece of news, well, if we made it worth their while to do it, then we would be guaranteed a constant feed of content. I guess another thing, I guess there could also be, how many ways can you think of for them to guarantee that? There's a couple of approaches that I think you could guess at. One, of course, would be for one would be for Russian bot armies and hackers or whoever, whether they are Russian government employees or are paid through some cutout somewhere or, or an ostensibly private operation hired by somebody, whether that's by Putin himself or some Kremlin operative or some oligarch at Putin's behest. Any one of those would be a possibility. If you really wanted to cover your tracks for whatever reason, and Putin says he wants this to happen, and I want a constant flow of content for the bots to use, and let's say for whatever reason he can't, not being a native English speaker or not necessarily being a native American political observer, he doesn't know that Breitbart is pretty much, constitutionally inclined to produce this content no matter what he does. He may say, I want someone to make sure, let's lock this in. Let's send some cash their way, for instance. And that would be the simplest, the bluntest route to it. And you maybe want to cover your tracks and you say, rather than cut you a check from Kremlin Bank, whatever, talk to one of the oligarchs. You're a billionaire. Here's what I need you to do. And you'll do it, too, because if you don't do it, I might maybe murder your whole family and make you not an oligarch or make you a dead oligarch. Take, some small sum. Take $1 million. To you, that's a small sum. And remember, it's a small sum to you because under my protection, I let you racketeer your way to billionaire status. Take some of that, take $1 million, head on over, and just straight up pay Breitbart. And I don't know whether that would mean, buy ads on their site or just invest in their site or pay Steve Bannon under the table, however you want to handle it, whether you want to do it on the up and up or under the table or pay to Bannon or pay to some other lower level managing editor or the writers for that matter. I want you to make sure they get paid and make sure that they know that they're getting paid from people who have an interest in seeing this content flow continue. That's the bluntest way of doing it. Of course, another way of doing it would be through sponsorships, right? And it could either be from Russian companies or by Russian-controlled companies that aren't necessarily based in Russia, so that it wouldn't raise any eyebrows at Breitbart if they cared about such things. So that, some company or another wants to buy ads. It just so happens that it's an LLC and you can't tell exactly who owns it. Maybe it's owned by another LLC, which is owned by another LLC, but ultimately controlled by Russian interests who are loyal to Putin and who owe their fortunes to Putin. Just supposing. And they say, we'll buy $100,000 worth of ads. And not to be as upfront about it and to say, we just like the tenor of your content. Those are the people we want to reach. We feel like we have data that says our target audience is reading your site. It could get even more convoluted, more, I don't know what. It could be more nefarious or at least sneakier on the part of the Russians. They may be the sources for these stories. It may be that Breitbart reporters think that they're doing straight up news and they're getting tips or hints or off the record confirmations by Russian operatives posing as somebody else, saying either your story's true or, for instance, that, boy, your story would be a lot better if I were willing to give you information which I can give you anonymously that would fill in, the missing element in your story that would take it from maybe this is happening to I think I can connect the dots for you. That would really be interesting. And again, it could be done kind of straight up, or you could be creating fake news with your Macedonian teenager operatives and putting it out there and having it distributed in such a way that you're pretty sure that Breitbart writers will see it. And then it's not them being paid to make up stories. It's them reflecting what's already out there on the internet. If you were savvy about the way Breitbart operated, you would probably eventually figure out that their version of journalistic standards allows for running a headline that is, well, probably a little bit misleading or overblown at the very least, but based on, reportage that's out there. I mean, yeah, they're going to pay more attention to right-wing and or conspiratorial sites, and if they are packaged up and presented like they are, granted right-wing slanted, but actual news or investigative sites, whatever it takes, getting the Breitbart writers enthusiastic about turning to this new Drudge Report of the right, then fine, go ahead and do it. And if they could work it as a self-reinforcing feedback loop, they were, one, generating the content on other sites, two, using bots to make sure that Breitbart staffers were seeing these stories and seeing the kind of traffic and excitement those stories generated, thanks to Cambridge Analytica, for instance, they could then convince Breitbart, we also need to be running these stories, and they may very well be doing that without any knowledge whatsoever of the fact that the ball was set rolling by Russian operatives. Or, maybe somebody else. Or not Russian operatives at all, just weirdos in their basement, 400-pound guys, as Trump said during the debate, on a bed somewhere. It's entirely possible. It's wide open. It's a weird situation. to say the very least. All right, well, let's see. Where to go with the rest? I got a lot we can pack in here. The Gorsuch nomination hearings are going on in the background as I speak to you in this podcast anyway. And I had some thoughts about how that was going and what needed to be said about it. And maybe we'll spend some time on that and save our examination once again of Sebastian Gorka and his weird background for another day. Let's take a look at this one. I saw an article from the Rachel Maddow blog, which with the entry, of course, written by Steve Bannon, and also a tweet storm, which I read and which likewise inspired a tweet storm from me. And I don't know whether, is it worth the time for me to read you my own tweet storm from yesterday? I have no idea. But let me start here with what's going on with the Gorsuch nomination from Steve Bannon here. Gorsuch nomination creates important test for Senate Democrats. A lot of people, a lot of wondering going on about, well, what should they be doing? What, should they be filibustering? Should they absolutely filibuster Gorsuch or not? Just as people have asked me on Twitter and in the background during the show sometimes, shouldn't Democrats be opposing all of Trump's nominees, cabinet level or otherwise? For me, for you, it's probably an easy question. For actual senators representing actual states, it will be a little bit more nuanced. I still come down on the side of, honestly, you should just do whatever you can to obstruct for as long as you can. And, again, for me, it's an easy vote. Yeah, I would probably vote to filibuster Gorsuch. There's mitigating circumstances which are worth acknowledging, but I don't think change the outcome here for me. And likewise with the appointees, I sometimes am moved, I guess my democratic instincts say, well, this or that nominee, they may not be the worst one in the world, or they might not deserve to have the backlash that Senate Republicans deserve for their actions to be brought to, visited upon them. But I sorted a bit of that out in my tweet storm yesterday. But let's take a look at the Gorsuch nomination just to stay a little bit more focused here. I know that's difficult for me. Steve Bannon's article here. When Judge Neil Gorsuch arrived in the Senate yesterday, he did start Monday, of course, to begin his Supreme Court confirmation process, there was a little news before the nominee even sat down. Senator Michael Bennet of Gorsuch's home state of Colorado joined the nominee and graciously introduced him to the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's the sort of thing a senator ordinarily does when he or she supports a nomination, which meant Bennet was already undermining Democratic opposition to Donald Trump's high court nominee before the process had even begun in earnest. Roll Call reported Bennet did not say if he would support Gorsuch for the high court, telling the committee, "I am keeping an open mind on this nomination." His introduction did highlight what he saw as two clouds hanging over the proceedings, which the committee's Democrats also acknowledged. The first is the Republicans' refusal to hold a hearing or a vote on President Barack Obama's nominee to fill the vacancy, Judge Merrick Garland. Bennet said it was tempting to deny Gorsuch a fair hearing, but two wrongs never make a right. Okay. Now Steve Bannon responds. That's an interesting principle, actually. Under normal circumstances, it's fairly compelling to think powerful policymakers should act in a mature and responsible fashion, steering clear of pettiness and needlessly cheap efforts to score partisan points. Many understandably grow weary of tit-for-tat schemes. Not Donald Trump. He can't get enough, though he's not so interested in the tats, I think. Anyway, Steve continues here. I have a few straightforward follow-up questions for the Democratic senator. Two wrongs may not make a right, but what does? Given the circumstances, what's just in this situation? How will rewarding Republican maximalist tactics move us any closer to what's right. As we discussed when Gorsuch was first nominated, and there's a linked piece in here, part of this fight has to do with the jurist's record and ideology, but just as important, and perhaps more so, is the broader context. Over a year ago, President Obama chose a compromise nominee, Merrick Garland, to fill the Supreme Court's vacancy. The Senate Republican majority responded by launching a blockade without modern precedent. Garland, GOP senators declared, would not be considered in any way. No hearing, no debate, no floor vote, no consideration. As part of a scandalous display of obstructionism, Republicans blocked a qualified compromise nominee because the president was a Democrat. To execute the gambit, GOP senators made up rules that didn't exist. They lied about rules that did exist. And when they assumed Americans would never actually elect Donald Trump to the presidency, they said they were prepared to leave the court's vacancy in place until 2021 at the earliest. That is to say, anticipating a Hillary Clinton win, they would keep it vacant for another 4 years. In other words, Republicans stole a Supreme Court seat and now expect to be rewarded for it. GOP senators aren't just pretending the events of 2016 didn't happen. They're simultaneously insisting that the Senate play the game by the standard rules now that the people who set the fire to the rule book are satisfied with their handiwork. The New York Times' David Leonhardt's assessment from several weeks ago is as correct now as it was then. Democrats should not weigh this nomination the same way they've weighed previous nominations, previous ones, he says. This one is different. The presumption should be that Gorsuch does not deserve confirmation because the process that led to his nomination was illegitimate. Michael Bennet seems eager to take the high road. His position is that Republicans were wrong in 2016 when they radically abused the process, so it's better that Democrats steer clear of their own obstructionism in 2017. And as nice as that may sound, it's an approach that carries its own dangers. Bennett's two wrongs never make a right posture, while certainly polite, tells Republicans that there are no consequences for their actions. GOP senators stole a Supreme Court seat, and by playing nice, Dems would reward Republicans with the prize they sought at no price whatsoever. The precedent this would set creates a new set of incentives for senators going forward. You, too, can abuse the process in outrageous ways, get exactly what you want, and suffer literally no penalties. Something the Washington Post's E.J. Dionne Jr. wrote in early February, long before Bennett's introduction of Gorsuch, continues to ring true. And it's this: at least I understand Republican and conservative hypocrisy on this subject. They are focused on power and who will wield it. I find it harder to understand well-meaning people who were appalled by the hyper-politicization involved in the Garland blockade, but now claim that an effort to stop Gorsuch's confirmation will only make matters worse. Worse? Really? If someone slugs you, should you be condemned if you defend yourself by swinging back? If a bully makes someone's life miserable, will taking him on and calling his bluff only make matters worse? Some people think so, I guess. It's out there. Perhaps you think the above is hyperbolic, and I accept that my line of thinking won't appeal to pacifists. But if you are not a pacifist, ask yourself how this procedural extremism will be halted if one side is rewarded for violating all the conventions and rules of fair play, and the other side just meekly goes along. The Rubicon, Dionne added, was crossed with Garland. Republicans radically broke the rules last year. Democrats have to decide whether they're doing themselves, the country, or the political system any favors by pretending otherwise. And I'm largely in agreement. And I don't know whether I necessarily refined the points here. But then I saw this tweet storm from Charles Clymer. And let's open that up, and we'll also take a quick look at Charles's bio here so that we know of whom we speak. He's got the blue check mark. He's a writer. Gender queer. We'll start with that. Army vet. Georgetown alumna. Let's see. And he's I'm not certain. Does this tell us anything about where he might write. He writes his stuff, he posts his stuff at medium.com. Doesn't tell us that much. But anyway, I thought Charles had some pretty good thoughts on this, and I wanted to read his tweet storm. It's not huge. It's not 100, not game theory, but it's pretty involved, and then I'll offer my own. Let's see. There are many reasons why I oppose Neil Gorsuch, but the biggest is the integrity of our confirmation process. Good point. Good start, right? Last month, I was talking to a friend about Gorsuch. She's a Harvard Law grad, one of the smartest folks I know. She pointed out that Gorsuch, despite her disagreements with him, is an honorable candidate in that he respects the letter of the law. Maybe, and I'm sure Armando has differences, but for the sake of the argument, I'm just reading. But I get what they're at. Anyway, I completely agree with her, says Charles. From everything I've read about Gorsuch so far, he strikes me as an honorable person. An honorable person, albeit completely out of touch with enormous issues of privilege, including access to abortion care. C'est la vie, says Charles. By the way, there are some critics inside the thread who say, c'est la vie. I mean, that's a luxury a lot of us don't have. True. And I'm sure that's acknowledged at some point. Just not in this thread, but okay. That part, all right, we see why people would have some trouble with it. Let's go on. I'm less angry, says Charles, at Gorsuch's views than I am at the completely god-awful way the U.S. Senate has treated the American people on this. Imagine for a moment that it had been Ruth Bader Ginsburg who died last year instead of Scalia, and that a Democratic Senate blocked a Republican president's Supreme Court nominee, refusing to even consider them. Think about that for a second. Familiar thought exercise, right? And then imagine a Democratic presidential nominee had colluded with a foreign government and the FBI to hijack our election. Okay. I can't begin to conceive of the S storm. You know what kind of storm that is. Republicans would have raised if the shoe were on the other foot. True, again, part of the same exercise. We would be in full-on martial law territory with angry white men marching on Washington bearing semi-automatic assault rifles. Maybe. The stability of the United States would have been under immediate threat if Republicans had been so severely shafted like this, but we're supposed to just accept that Gorsuch is a nice guy and ignore the completely corrupt and effed up past year of this. I have a hard time pretending everything is just hunky-dory and Gorsuch should be given a free and fair confirmation process. I really do. The double standard of conservatives in their behavior versus what they would tolerate from liberals never ceases to amaze me. No shame. So no, I don't care if the faithful servant, if he is a faithful servant of judicial integrity. I don't care if he's a saint. I'm pissed. I'm angry. And I'm wondering why Democratic leadership refuses to grow an effing spine and fight back on this. Anyway, that's just me. I've surpassed frustration to a state of pure disenchantment. This is not a system for all people, and that is the end of the thread. So, what did you think? I said to myself, and I guess then eventually to everybody else, I am in general agreement with that thread. What the GOP did isn't done. Like, that's just not done. What the Republicans did isn't done in the Senate because it will provoke serious backlash, right? That's the first thing I want to. This reminds me of so many other things. Republicans, what they did is just had never been done because everybody knew you could get yourself killed in a Senate like, armed as such, where every senator is a nuclear-tipped missile, as they say. But what if only half of the senators are nuclear-tipped missiles and the other are pacifists, right? If the backlash doesn't materialize, first off, the lesson is simple. Do it again, and do it again, and do it again. Do it again and again until you find the limits, if you ever find them. And if this backlash doesn't materialize, you've also removed a key component of the balance of power that keeps the worst impulses of people in the Senate in check. In other words, if senators would never do that, whatever it is, It's because they know that they'd suffer consequences for doing it. Take away the consequences, you've taken away the norms. That's not done. Well, why? Because it would be crazy. If you do something like that, everything you sponsor would be killed. They would filibuster everything you do. They would remove you from your committees, whatever. If you do it alone, it's one thing. Do it in collusion with an entire majority, well, that might be something you can get away with, but it's not that there won't be consequences, or is it? When Republicans threatened the nuclear option the first time around in 2005, not a lot of people even remember that anymore, but I do. And it was frightening, too, and I was worried about it. And I don't know whether I didn't think it was good for the long-term stability of the Senate. That's true. I mean, and it isn't. It's not. I understand that. I agree with, Rich. Where I'm sympathetic with Rich Ehrenberg is it was not a good idea to begin with. It wasn't a good idea to pull. It was a clever one. I give all kinds of props to the design of the play. It's fantastic. But I understand. It's not a good road to start down. The problem was by 2009, the problem was, although I agreed with Ehrenberg that it generally was bad for the Senate, I felt it was even worse for the Senate to allow the threat of the nuclear option to be leveraged without response. When the Republicans threatened the nuclear option in 2005, it virtually required that Democrats at some point do the same with their next majority. You have to make the same wrong in order to try, not necessarily, I don't know whether it makes a right, but I know what doesn't make it a right. One wrong. Can two wrongs make a right? It doesn't necessarily follow. But again, here's where it never follows. One wrong. You're never going to make a right out of that. It's impossible. It's definitively impossible. It's a wrong. I'm sorry. Let's add nothing, but somehow it'll make it into a right. Well, I guess it's not that you add nothing. Right, philosophically, well, I'm treating it with kindness, and I think we'll grow a kinder Republican minority in the future. Well, I doubt it. Anyway, so I think it virtually requires response. That might just be that the response is another threat, and that triggering the nuclear option isn't necessarily the proper response. There's an argument to be made. Anyway, I would say anything less than threatening back would have meant that there were no consequences to the 2005 threat, even though that's not how Democratic senators thought of it at the time. A lot of them who were there in 2005 might have, I don't know. I don't know whether they forgot. I don't know whether they just didn't want to be seen on record as thinking of it this way. But Republicans in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, until the end of 2013 when it was finally triggered, Republicans spent that time saying, and especially towards the end of the process, that triggering the nuclear option for Democrats was, unprecedented. It would be terrible. It would destroy the Senate. It was this, that, and the other thing. And that, of course, required ignoring that there were Republican senators present there who had advocated such a thing in 2005. And that's okay. I understand there's a certain level of hypocrisy necessary to conduct this sort of debate. But it also required ignoring the Democrats who were there who said, look, there's going to be consequences. Even the Democrats who participated in the Gang of 14 who said, we'll forbear from using the filibuster on a judicial nomination except in extraordinary circumstances. Well, why the exception for extraordinary circumstances? That's at least a tacit recognition of the likelihood that non-response in an escalation situation simply invites more escalation. Anyway, I viewed the 2010 and forward threat to use the nuclear option not as what's the Latin term that they like to use for that? Sui generis? not as a sui generis invocation of this strange and bizarre new power. I always maintained that it was a power that the senators always had, but rather that it was a response to, and the proper response to, having been threatened with the same in 2005. This story doesn't begin in 2010, 11, 12, 13. It begins in 2005. And if you don't like the fact that you're now being threatened with the nuclear option, you shouldn't have brought it up in 2005. This is the consequence for doing that. So, even if you're inclined to believe that Gorsuch himself is, however you want to put it, an honest guy, an honest broker, a believer in judicial integrity, or just willing to say it only more generally like this. Well, he's within tolerances. He's an extremist in a certain sense, and in a very real sense, but he's not outside the bounds of the kind of jurist you should always expect Republicans to be nominating from this point forward. So even if you're inclined to believe that Gorsuch is within those tolerances as a nominee, or if you're inclined to believe that Gorsuch himself personally doesn't deserve to be punished for what Senate Republicans did in 2016, well, too freaking bad. It's not about you, Gorsuch. It's about the Senate. The reality is, sorry, but the Senate is where this stuff gets determined. The Senate is where the nominations are considered, where they are approved or disapproved or filibuster or anything. This is the filter through which we fill vacancies on the federal bench, period. End of story. So, deal with the reality you're given. You go to war with the army you have, right? You go to a nomination with the Senate you have, not some future Senate you may wish to have when everybody sings Kumbaya. What this means is Republican senators should have known full well, and did know full well. They just thought the outcome would be different, and we seem to be proving that they're right. Republican senators should have considered that the fallout of their actions in 2016 in blockading Garland would land on the next nominee, and them to some extent, but that to the extent to which it's unfair that Gorsuch suffer these consequences, look to the selfishness of Republicans in the Senate on that. I'm sorry that they fall on you, but these guys are putting them on you. Oh, it's raining on poor Gorsuch. He doesn't deserve this. No, Republicans of 2016 are pissing on your leg and telling you it's raining. There's your Judge Judy reference, Bill. Get better. All right. That's what they neglected to take into consideration or refused to acknowledge when they did this. Republican senators were so careless with this process that has consequences for them, but also for all future Supreme Court nominees, and really any nominee of any kind. But they didn't care about that. They just wanted to get through the 2016 elections. They didn't think Trump was going to win. They figured whatever. I don't know. But they just didn't want to lose this fight. So they said, rather than us losing something, to hell with whatever judicial, whatever nominee with whatever level of judicial integrity comes next. He could be a saint. But it doesn't matter because we will have effed it up for him because we're very selfish people. They would never think that about themselves. But they should, because that's the truth. This is the process, and if you screw with the process like that, there will be consequences, and they won't fall on you, and you know that. So you're happy with that, but then you boo-hoo about the person they do fall on. What are you crying about? You designed this thing to not fall on your head. Now you're unhappy it's falling on somebody else's head? No, you're not. You just know that you need to be seen to pretend to be unhappy. Right? Republican senators are careless with the process, but they don't care that the consequences are going to fall on a Republican nominee or any SCOTUS nominee going forward. They don't care, that is, until they had to pretend to care or be seen to pretend to care. So they pretend that Gorsuch wasn't done in by their willingness to launch their nuclear weapons in a mutually assured destruction scenario. That's what happened here. They blockaded Garland knowing that the Democratic response could be to filibuster anybody coming from the Republican side in the near future. So, why do it? Don't know. They just went ahead and did it anyway. Now, that said, there is more, of course, that goes into the decision of how Democrats should proceed than just this balance of powers. There's more to consider, including, of course, the possibility that Republicans would, either allow Gorsuch to be filibustered and then come back with a far worse nominee later on, or might decide we have to invoke the nuclear option now to make sure that Gorsuch gets through. However they want to handle it, there's always the possibility that they can screw up the balance of powers thing by leveraging the nuclear option again. That's as it may be, but it also means that Democrats haven't got much choice in what to do. They might wish to play for the preservation of the filibuster on Supreme Court nominees rather than see it nuclear optioned away so that they can prevent, for instance, a filibuster-less or filibuster-proof consideration of yet another conservative nominee that would tip the balance of the court later. I understand that as a concern, and I've acknowledged it, and it does make a certain amount of sense. But it's kind of like, I guess I would compare it to anecdotally what I hear or what I hear people say that NASCAR drivers say, for instance, when encountering a wreck up ahead of them, immediately in front of them, there's no time to avoid it, no time to stop. You're just too close to the cars that have wrecked. There's no point in trying to guess what's going to bounce where in an attempt to weave your way through a wreck. You just go straight through it. There's a big cloud of smoke. You don't know what's in it. Something may be there. Something may be there now. Something may not be there by the time you get there with your car. Something may not be there now, and you drive into a hole and something comes spinning your way. There's no way to know. It's a dangerous situation. You don't have any time to calculate. You just go straight through. And if you go straight through, likewise, people who are behind you or to the side of you also know that you're going to go straight through. It's like playing blackjack, right? You know that guy, you know the rules. That guy's not going to take that card, and everybody gets mad when you screw everything up. You hit on that. You ruined my strategy, right? Everybody knows that everybody's going to go straight through. The guys to your left, the guys to your right, go straight through. Don't move from your lane. You'll screw up even more. You're going to cause a crash behind the crash. There's nothing to be done. You can't guess whether or not there's ever going to be a second Trump nominee. You can't guess whether the next nomination, the next vacancy is going to be a Democrat or a Republican appointed justice. You can't guess whether it'll be more or less conservative. You can't guess who's going to be nominated or who's going to be doing the nominating or what the situation is going to be with the balance of power in the Senate when that nomination comes through. Too many moving parts. And too likely that by not responding now in the hopes of preserving the filibuster on the Supreme Court in case there's an even worse nominee to come, runs the risk of finding yourself having let Gorsuch go through in the name of preserving the filibuster, only to have this terrible nominee come along and you're forced off the filibuster square once again because Republicans say, well, if you filibuster this one, we will nuclear option the filibuster for the Supreme Court nominations, and you will lose twice. And what do you say then about Gorsuch? Well, he was within tolerances? Yes. Well, they were going to nuclear filibuster anyway? Yes, also true. You're prescient in that, but you've lost twice nonetheless. that's not any better, of course, than filibustering Gorsuch and having them either nuke the filibuster now and install Gorsuch and having that rule in place for the next terrible nomination, or having Gorsuch, the Gorsuch nomination withdrawn and right now nominating someone far worse and then nuking the filibuster and putting them on and then having a terrible nomination come later too. You will have lost both. You're going to lose in both of these situations, more than likely. There are varying degrees of what to which you can lose and of what can be lost. But here it's, like I said, like driving through the wreck. Too many moving parts. I can only answer you right now about what I'm going to do right now. What will I do in the future? I don't know. What am I being asked about? Who's being nominated? Who's nominating them? How many people do I have in the Senate? I mean, if you can guess which, you might be able to guess which Supreme Court justice is likely to retire or die next, maybe you're even right. But is that it? Is the rest of the universe static? How many senators might die between now and then? What states will they be from? What party occupies the governor's mansion in that state? Will there be time for a special election before the next nomination comes up? Will that special election be won by the party that holds the seat now, which I guess is slightly more likely to be Republican than Democratic? Or will there be such a huge backlash against either what's going on in the Supreme Court or what's going on in the White House with Trump, if he's still there, that a Democrat would win that seat? I don't know. You don't know. Too many moving parts. Too difficult to guess. Only thing you can do is vote today on what you're being asked to vote for. You can't save your vote. You can't get down there on the floor and say, I'll let you know next nomination. You got to vote. You might as well drive straight through. Is it fair to Gorsuch? I don't know. Is it fair to you? You're the senator here. You're the one who's been victimized by the Republican obstructionism of 2016. You were the one that was supposed to get a vote on Garland. You're the one whose jealousies, to use the terms very often employed in, I guess, the old Federalist Papers. I mean, in that sense, not in the, I'm jealous of you having more money than me thing, but so much, but more generalized and less stigma attached to it, right? The jealousies of the prerogatives of office. That's supposed to be an actual check and balance against other members of the Senate, against the other side, the other house of the bicameral legislature, against the other branches of government. All sorts of things can be very well protected by, that what comes under the framework of jealousies. Are you going to let the insult stand because you don't want to insult Judge Gorsuch? He knows what he's walking into, and you could certainly explain it pretty coldly to him, too. I can think of a couple senators who could put this, I think, pretty bluntly, right? I think Al Franken would be great at this. It's not you, it's me. I feel that I was mistreated by the senators on the other side. I feel, to be honest, like they ignored your feelings in this. You deserve to have an open-minded hearing from the United States Senate and a vote based on your skills and abilities, not what pettiness might be occurring between us on this side of the aisle and them on that side of the aisle. And you probably don't even feel particularly comfortable hearing things divided up into us and them. But that's where we are. Your nomination will be decided in the Senate, and this one side that supports you did a horrible thing that cannot go unanswered to the other side. And they did that knowing that you were coming. and that you deserved a fair and open hearing. And they poisoned the well for you. And now you're mad at us. I'm going to have to live with that anger, I guess, because I'm not drinking from that poison well. I guess I don't even care who put the poison in there. I'm not going to drink it. I don't think you should drink it. But you can't turn to us and say it was unfair of you to put that poison in there when we know who did it. Will it result in a win? No, probably not. Can anything else result in a win? No, definitely not. So, as between probably and definitely, I'm going to go with the probably not. It doesn't guarantee a win. It doesn't guarantee anything. It's probably going to be a loss. But I would say we go, take our lumps, and put yourself in position to deliver some lumps back, because otherwise there's just no chance in the world that Republicans would walk away from the next opportunity to do the exact same thing. And they may never walk away from an opportunity to do the next thing. No matter, even if we somehow magically win on this one, they won't be chastened. So, what does that mean? Does it mean you throw your hands up and say there's nothing we can do? I would say not. Does it mean that there's something you can do to teach them a lesson? Maybe not that either. But what I would tell you is there's very little point in looking for that solution that will convince the bully not to bully you again, whether you win or lose here. I don't know. So I would say take the best option you can. You've chosen your path. Drive straight through. Come out the other side. Win or lose. You might get hit on the way through, but there are no good options here. You're just going to have to agree to take your lumps and see what happens. And I know that's not going to be terribly convincing to most Senate Democrats either, and they have their constituencies to consider, no doubt. But I think the longer you can draw this play out, the longer you have to consider the possibility that really, no matter what you do, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for the future of comity in the Senate. That is true. It doesn't look good for the future ability of Democrats to prevent Republicans from pulling stunts like this. It's just, unfortunately, something you're going to have to live with. All right. Well, I don't know how else to put it. I guess that's that's the best point I can put on it at this point. All right. So there we have it. This is about all we can fit in today's podcast. I hope that you enjoy what I was able to put together for you, cobbling this together. I guess I could go on. I feel like I could go on forever about the Gorsuch nomination, but I think we got the point across on that one. Let's see. We have the balance of the week, of course. We will have missed our opportunity to talk with Joan this week. I'm so sorry, Joan. Skype is the one thing I just cannot make run on this MacBook Air for some reason, and so we'll have to make good on that and just do twice as good a job next week when the old MacBook Pro is back from repair at Apple. Thank you to the folks at Apple for making that happen. Thanks for your patience and standing by and your forbearance with what will probably sound like a little bit of a sloppy version of a podcast, but I think the gist of it will be understandable. Hopefully this will work, and we'll all be happier than we would have been with an entire week of reruns, and we'll at least get 3 shows out of it. All right. I also can't tell you what's coming up on the after show because it hasn't that hasn't come up yet. It's Tuesday for me, Wednesday at 11 for you. I'm sure it's going to be awesome, and I'm sure it's going to be your best opportunity to catch up with the morning's news that's actually happening today rather than my best guess at what was going to be happening from my perspective on Tuesday.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Once again, thanks for standing by on us, and thank you again to those of you who have made additional contributions via our one-time contribution mechanism, Square Cash. We will put that towards a solution that will serve as a backup system so that this kind of interruption never happens again. Thanks so much.